The orders came at night. No fanfare, no briefing, just a sealed envelope delivered to the platoon leader while the rest of us tried to sleep in the barracks outside Fort Carson. Colorado winters cut through the walls. You could hear the wind pressing against the metal like it wanted in. By dawn, we were already packed into trucks, rifles across our chests, boots frozen stiff. None of us knew why Rangers were being sent to secure an old railway bridge in the middle of nowhere. When we rolled up to the valley, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, no distant highway noise. Just that massive steel bridge stretching over black water, flanked by mountains that looked like they hadn't been touched since the Ice Age. The locals called it Red Rock Bridge, though the steel beams were painted army green. Beneath it ran the Arkansas River, slow and heavy, as if weighed down by something unseen. A single officer waited for us at the site, coat buttoned to the neck, his hat pulled low. He didn't give his name. He didn't salute. He just told us the job: hold the bridge until the train passes. No questions, no deviation. His eyes flicked from man to man like he was sizing us up for a fight. Then he left, his Jeep disappearing down the dirt road before any of us could ask what was on that train. We set up perimeter positions fast as trained. Claymores wired, rifles sighted, comms checked. The bridge itself creaked and groaned under the weight of nothing, the wind pushing through its beams like whispers. The air smelled metallic, like rust and something older, sharper that burned the back of the throat. By nightfall, frost had formed across our rifles and gear. We rotated watches. The sky had no stars, just a solid sheet of black pressing down. Around 2 in the morning, while on sentry duty, I heard it. A long, distant screech of steel wheels on track, though the rails under the bridge lay dead still. No vibration, no movement, just sound. I scanned the horizon. Nothing. My breath clouded in front of me, but the screech went on, fading like it was circling the valley instead of approaching. When my relief came, he said he'd heard nothing, not one note. I almost laughed it off. Almost. The next morning, one of the privates swore he saw a figure walking along the far bank of the river, said it looked like a soldier, but too thin, too pale, moving like its joints didn't fit right. By the time we aimed scopes that way, there was nothing, just frozen brush and ice on the water. We didn't speak much after that. The silence grew heavier. It felt like the valley itself was listening, waiting. By the third night, the tracks began to hum under our boots, though no train was anywhere near, and that was when the real fear began to take hold. The sound carried through the steel beams like a heartbeat, slow and steady, promising something we weren't ready to face. And when the darkness closed in again, we knew the bridge wasn't ours to secure. It was something else holding us there, something already waiting on the rails. The valley had a way of swallowing sound. No matter how many of us were out there, no matter how often someone cleared their throat or adjusted their gear, it never seemed to break the silence. You could fire a rifle in that canyon, and I swear the echo would die before it reached the tree line. It felt like eyes were on us, though nothing was there. We weren't green troops. Most of us had seen deployments, trained until our hands bled, and spent long stretches in worse conditions than a Colorado winter. But something about this mission was different from the start. Too little information, too many unknowns. When Rangers are sent to a frozen valley to hold a bridge against no known threat, you know it isn't about protecting infrastructure. It's about keeping people away from something. The officer who gave us the orders didn't show again. Command only checked in once, a radio call that repeated the same phrase 3 times, hold until passage. No code names, no expected arrival, just those words. Our squad leader wrote them in his notebook like they meant more than they did, though I could see the unease in his jaw as he did it. We divided into 5 teams and spread across both sides of the bridge. 2 men kept watch on the far embankment, rifles trained on the tracks that disappeared into dense pine. Others patrolled the understructure, boots clanging against steel beams slick with frost. The river below rolled thick and black, catching what little light the moon offered. It didn't reflect like normal water. It absorbed, pulling the glow into itself until it was gone. By the second day, we fell into routine. We set up a command tent near the tree line, built small fires that smoked but gave little warmth, and ran equipment checks to kill time. A couple of guys passed the hours by playing cards. Someone tried to joke about the cold being worse than any enemy. Nobody laughed. Even the new kid, barely out of training, kept his mouth shut. There was a heaviness on us, the kind you can't shrug off. We asked around quietly if anyone had heard rumors about the bridge. One of the older sergeants, a man who'd grown up not far from Pueblo, said locals told stories about trains that never arrived, about shipments that vanished in transit. He said some folks swore they'd seen headlights barreling down those tracks with no locomotive attached, just light ripping through the valley before vanishing. He shrugged it off after, but the way he kept glancing at the tracks told me he believed more than he let on. Night patrols were the hardest. The wind froze your fingers stiff against the rifle, and the stillness pressed in until every sound felt like a warning. The clicking of ice on the river, the distant groan of the steel bridge as it settled. Once during my shift, I caught the faint rhythm of boots on metal behind me. I spun, rifle ready, but the walkway was empty. The footsteps stopped as soon as I turned. My pulse hammered in my ears. For the rest of that watch, I stood with my back against the rail, staring straight ahead. The strangest part wasn't the noises or the shadows. It was the feeling of time itself dragging. Hours stretched like days. Each sunrise felt reluctant, spilling light into the valley as if against its will. None of us slept much. The tents grew colder, the ground harder. A couple of the guys started swearing they saw lights flickering inside the tree line across the river. But when we checked, there was nothing but frozen brush and darkness. On the third morning, our radio picked up a burst of static. We thought it was command checking in, but buried in the distortion was something else. A voice, faint and broken, repeating words we couldn't understand. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything any of us recognized. Just fragments carried on a channel that should have been secure. The sergeant snapped the radio off, jaw tight, and told us it was interference. None of us argued, but nobody bought it either. Meals became a ritual. Canned rations heated on weak flames, coffee strong enough to peel paint, passed around like it mattered more than the food itself. It wasn't about eating. It was about keeping each other steady. At night, we'd talk in low voices about home, about cars, about women, about anything that wasn't this place. But no one mentioned the bridge, not directly. It sat behind every word anyway, looming, humming faintly under our boots whenever the wind died. On the fourth night, something happened that changed the air between us. One of the privates, quiet kid, sharp eyes, was on watch near the northern approach. He called out over the radio, voice shaking, saying he saw a train headlight coming down the line. We scrambled, weapons ready, lining the bridge in silence. And we saw it too. A light far in the distance, growing brighter, moving fast. The hum of the rails climbed into our bones. The steel groaned. It was coming. We braced, hearts pounding, rifles trained. The light roared toward us, bright enough to burn through the fog. Then, just as it reached the edge of the bridge, it vanished. No train, no sound, no weight on the rails, just empty tracks stretching into the dark. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. No one spoke for a long time. When the sergeant finally ordered us back to posts, his voice cracked on the last word. The next day, frost thickened on the bridge beams until they shone like glass. We tried to scrape it off, but it spread faster than we could clear it. The metal smelled sharp, almost chemical. One of the men brushed it with his bare hand and yanked back instantly, cursing. His palm was burned raw, like he'd touched a hot pipe instead of ice. He swore he felt the steel pulse under his skin, like it was alive. The river below moved slower now, sluggish, as if freezing from the inside. Dead fish floated belly up near the banks, their eyes clouded over. Birds stopped coming entirely. Even the smoke from our fires didn't rise. It hung around us, trapped low to the ground. We were soldiers, trained for the worst. But this wasn't an enemy you could see or shoot. It was something else. Something we weren't prepared to face. And as much as we wanted to believe it was tricks of the cold or exhaustion, deep down we knew. The bridge wasn't just steel and rivets. It was a marker, a gate, and we were standing guard over whatever waited to come through it. The sixth night was when the valley stopped pretending. Until then, we'd managed to write things off as tricks of the cold, stress, or imagination. But that night, the bridge itself spoke. It started with the humming, stronger this time, deep enough to rattle canteens against steel and shake frost loose from the beams. Every man on watch felt it under his boots. The sergeant ordered us to battle stations, thinking maybe this was the train command had warned us about. We formed along the rails, weapons aimed down the dark line. Then came the vibration in our chests. Not the kind you get from engines or artillery. This was lower, stranger. It carried into our bones like someone plucking strings inside us. A few guys pressed hands to their ribs like they were afraid something might burst. The younger private vomited into the snow. And then, through the mist, we heard it. Whistles. Old-fashioned, long, drawn-out steam whistles, echoing across the valley. They didn't match the rhythm of any train I'd ever heard. Too slow, too mournful. They rose and fell like voices crying across the years. We saw no smoke, no sparks, no light on the tracks, only sound. One of the men panicked and fired. His rifle cracked sharp in the stillness. The round vanished into the fog. That broke the silence for good. Orders barked, boots slammed, safeties clicked off. Everyone braced for contact that never came. The sound faded after 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it finally stopped, the bridge groaned like a wounded animal. Rivets popped, steel flexed, and just as suddenly as it began, the hum died, leaving us shaking in the cold. The morning after, our squad leader gathered us near the command tent. His face was pale and lined deeper than usual, like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He told us 2 things. First, nobody fires without direct orders again. Second, nobody talks about what happened on the radio. Not a word. We knew what that meant. Whatever mission this was, command expected us to keep it contained. We weren't just holding a bridge. We were holding secrets. Morale started cracking. The card games stopped. Coffee went cold before anyone touched it. Guys sat alone staring at the rails like they were waiting for answers. The quiet kid who first spotted the phantom headlight barely spoke anymore. His eyes never left the tree line. That afternoon, I volunteered for patrol under the bridge. I don't know why. Maybe I thought being closer to the steel would make sense of it. Instead, I found something worse. Hanging beneath the girders, carved deep into the frozen beams, were names. Dozens of them, gouged into the metal with something sharp. Some looked fresh. Others were rusted over, almost lost. I traced a gloved finger across one of them. It read T. Myers, 1943. Another said, R. Kelly, 1918. I scraped frost away and found more. Different years, different wars, all etched into the same place, as if soldiers had stood here before us, guarding the same ghost bridge. When I told the sergeant, he only stared at me for a long time, then muttered that we didn't need more reasons to lose sleep. But I could see the fear in his eyes. He already knew. That night, it escalated again. I was on second watch, standing at the center span, when the air changed. The temperature plummeted so fast, frost spread across my rifle in seconds. My breath froze in my throat. Then the mist rose from the river, thicker than before, curling up around the beams until the bridge seemed to float in a white ocean. Through it, shapes moved. At first, I thought it was tricks of the fog, but they grew clearer. Silhouettes of men marching, dozens of them, heads low, packs on their backs, rifles slung. Their boots struck the steel, but made no sound. They marched straight across the bridge, through me, through everything, and vanished into the fog on the far side. I stood frozen, rifle tight in my hands, trying not to breathe. One of them turned as he passed me. His face was gray, hollow, eyes burned out like ash. His lips moved. I swear I heard words scrape the inside of my skull. Not done yet. When the march ended, I dropped to my knees, shaking. By dawn, word had spread. I hadn't told anyone, but the others saw their own things. One man swore he heard his dead brother calling from the rails. Another said he felt hands dragging at his legs when he crossed to relieve watch. The youngest admitted he saw nothing at all, but the way he said it, we knew he wished he had. Sleep became impossible. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard the footsteps, the whistles, the grinding of unseen wheels. Some of us stopped eating. Others clung to coffee and cigarettes until their hands shook. The sergeant held us together with drills and patrols, but even his orders carried a crack in them now. On the 8th day, something crossed the bridge that wasn't fog. It was near dawn. A pale light flickered in the mist, brighter than moonlight, weaker than the phantom headlight we'd seen before. It drifted, swaying, like a lantern carried by unseen hands. It moved slow, weaving across the rails. Then it stopped in the middle of the span. We surrounded it, rifles raised. Nobody wanted to fire first. The lantern floated higher, and we saw what carried it. A figure no taller than a child, wrapped in rags that fluttered against no wind. Its face was covered by a sackcloth mask, stitched shut where the mouth should be. It lifted the lantern, tilting it like an offering. And then the bridge screamed. Every rivet shrieked. Steel bent and snapped back. The river below churned as if boiling. The figure dropped the lantern, and the light burst into smoke that spread across the valley. When it cleared, the figure was gone. The bridge went still, but none of us lowered our weapons for a long time. By now, doubt wasn't an option. We were trapped in something larger than orders, larger than war. Still, none of us spoke the word haunting every mind. Haunted. Soldiers don't use that word. We say compromised, unstable, hostile, never haunted. But we knew. On the 10th day, the radio came alive again. Not static this time, not gibberish. A voice calm and clipped, speaking English with a tone too precise to be human. Prepare for passage. Maintain control. Do not interfere. We scrambled to respond, but the radio cut dead. Half the squad wanted to leave. The rest said we'd be hunted down if we abandoned orders. The sergeant stood silent for a long time, then finally told us the truth. He'd been briefed. Not fully, not enough, but enough to know this bridge had been activated before. Units like ours had been sent, told to hold, then dismissed once the train passed. But none of those men ever spoke of what they saw, and many never came home. That night, the sound returned stronger than ever. The rails burned faintly red under our boots. Whistles echoed, overlapping, growing into a chorus of screams disguised as steam. The steel shook so violently we could barely stand. And then we saw it. Lights, this time not one but dozens, flaring in the fog. Windows lit in long rows like passenger cars rolling through the mist. Shadows moved inside them, faces pressed against glass, hands clawing, mouths open in silent terror. The train barreled toward the bridge, silent, unstoppable. We braced, weapons raised, teeth clenched, every instinct telling us to fire. The phantom locomotive hit the edge of the bridge and passed straight through us. Cold burned every nerve as it went. I saw men collapsing, gasping, some screaming. The cars tore across the span, hundreds of them, each packed with shapes that begged through the windows. Their eyes glowed faint, pale white. Some pressed notes against the glass, though we couldn't read them. When the last car vanished into the fog, the bridge went dead quiet. Frost cracked off steel. The river calmed. We stood there shivering, every man knowing the truth. The train wasn't cargo. It wasn't supplies. It was a prison, and it wasn't empty. The valley didn't return to normal after the train. If anything, the air grew heavier, as if the ground itself carried memory of what had just passed. None of us spoke when the last car disappeared. We just stood there, rifles slack, eyes locked on empty rails that still glowed faintly red. The sergeant finally barked for us to fall back, but his voice cracked on the order. We moved like ghosts ourselves, boots crunching frost, silence thick between us. Back at the command tent, we waited for the radio. It stayed dead. No confirmation, no follow-up orders, nothing. That was when doubt hardened into something worse. Suspicion. By mid-morning, one of the older corporals snapped. He demanded to know why we were even here, what we were protecting. He swore command had set us up, that we were nothing more than bait to keep civilians away from whatever this place really was. No one argued with him. Instead, we all looked to the sergeant. He hesitated, then admitted he knew pieces. Not the whole truth, but enough to chill us. According to his briefing, Red Rock Bridge wasn't just any span of steel. It was a marker built over older foundations. Native stories claimed the river bend beneath had been cursed long before settlers came. Later, when rail lines expanded west, accidents multiplied here. Entire trains disappeared in fog banks. Others arrived derailed, every passenger dead with no sign of collision. The Army rebuilt the bridge during the First World War, then again in the Second. Each time, records vanished. Every decade or so, reports of phantom passage returned. Command never admitted it publicly, but they sent units like ours to stand guard when the activity spiked. He said the phrase, "hold until passage," wasn't new. It was protocol, a ritual disguised as orders. We sat in silence after that, staring at the ground. Nobody asked the next question out loud. What happens if the passage doesn't end? The 11th night gave us the answer. I was on overwatch with 2 others when we spotted movement at the tree line. Not fog this time. Actual figures stepping out of the dark. They wore uniforms, not ours, not modern. Their gear was ragged, mud-caked, rifles slung across backs like relics from another century. They moved slow, shuffling, heads tilted at unnatural angles. We shouted warnings. No response. The sergeant ordered flares. The burst lit the valley in harsh white, revealing dozens of them. Soldiers from different eras by the look of it. Doughboy helmets, patched greatcoats, torn combat fatigues. Some limped, some dragged broken limbs, but all pressed toward the bridge. We raised rifles. No man wanted to fire first, but the pressure built until instinct took over. Bursts ripped the night. Shadows dropped, but instead of blood, they dissolved into smoke that curled back into the fog. For everyone that fell, 2 more emerged. They didn't attack or run, only kept moving, dragged forward by the bridge itself. The sergeant screamed, "Cease fire." "They're not hostile," he shouted. "They're passengers." Passengers. The word cut through us like ice. We held position, watching as they shuffled past. Some turned hollow eyes toward us. Some opened mouths in silent screams. One brushed close enough that I felt cold radiating from his gear. It smelled of mud and gunpowder long burned out. They filed onto the bridge, vanishing one by one into mist. No train this time, just them, feeding themselves to the rails. When the last figure passed, silence returned, heavier than before. None of us moved. The next morning, our radio finally crackled. A voice, not the clipped tone from before. This one was human, tired. "Report," it said. The sergeant hesitated. Then he told the truth, as much as he dared. Phantom train, apparitions, passage completed. Static filled the line. Then the voice spoke again. "Hold position. Passage not complete. Do not interfere with boarding." Boarding! We exchanged glances, but nobody spoke. That afternoon, I checked the carved names under the bridge again. More had appeared. Fresh gouges, as if written overnight. One of them matched the corporal who'd broken down the day before. He was alive, sitting by the fire, chain smoking and staring blankly. But his name was there, deep and sharp. I didn't tell him. By the 12th night, paranoia broke us. The youngest private swore he saw men in our own uniforms marching into the mist, rifles still warm in their hands. Another claimed he'd seen his own reflection in the river, but the reflection didn't move when he did. Then came the worst. During a late watch, one of the sentries went missing. No gunfire, no shout, just gone. We found his rifle near the center of the span, barrel frosted over. His boots were there too, neatly placed side by side, laces tied. But no sign of him. The sergeant called it desertion. None of us believed that. The next morning, his name appeared under the bridge. We stopped sleeping altogether. The firewood was gone. The rations froze before we could heat them. Men muttered prayers under their breath, voices cracking. Others stared at nothing for hours. I started keeping a journal, scratching words into the back of my field manual. If no one survived, maybe someone would find it. Maybe they'd understand what we went through. The writing didn't help. Every time I looked down at the page, the words seemed to shift, letters bending into shapes I didn't recognize. Once, I swear, the ink bled down the page like it wanted off the paper. On the 13th night, the train returned. Not faint this time, not half seen. It roared into the valley with full fury, light blazing, steel screaming. The ground shook hard enough to throw us off balance. Through the windows, the faces were clearer. Some were soldiers, some civilians, some children, all pressing, all pleading. One smashed its hands bloody against the glass, leaving red streaks before fading. I recognized one of them, the missing sentry. His mouth moved in rhythm with the others. "Help us." The sergeant ordered us not to fire, but one of the corporals broke, unloading a full magazine into the phantom cars. The bullets passed through, but the glass cracked anyway. For a heartbeat, we saw inside. Rows of bodies chained to benches, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide, glowing white. Smoke coiled through the cars, wrapping them like wires. Then the cracks sealed and the train sped on. When it vanished, the corporal dropped his rifle. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The radio returned hours later, the same precise voice. "Contain yourselves. You are witnesses only. Do not attempt rescue." The sergeant demanded answers. Who were they? What was the train? Why us? The voice paused, then said words that made the cold sink deeper than ever. They are the unresolved, the lost from every conflict. The bridges they're crossing, you are to guard it, nothing more. Then silence. We sat in the tent, each man staring at the others. None of us had the courage to say what we thought. We were watching a harvest. The 14th night broke one of us completely. The young private who'd held it together longer than most finally snapped. He stripped his gear, walked onto the span barefoot, and screamed into the mist. He begged the train to take him, begged it to end the waiting. We tried to drag him back, but the rails burned red hot under our boots. The mist surged, swallowing him whole. His scream cut short. When it cleared, he was gone. His name joined the others under the bridge by morning. By then, even the sergeant's resolve cracked. He told us he no longer believed command would relieve us. We weren't guardians. We were offerings. The corporal asked the question none of us wanted answered. How many of us would join the list before the passage ended? The sergeant didn't reply. He just stared at the steel, lips moving in a prayer we couldn't hear. The 15th night came, and the valley trembled like a beast waking. The whistle rose again, louder, sharper, splitting the air like a blade. Lights blazed across the horizon, more cars than before, stretching so far we couldn't see the end. This time the doors opened. Shapes stepped out, walking onto the bridge, dragging chains, faces pale as ash. They didn't march past us. They stopped, staring with hollow eyes, waiting. And for the first time we realized they weren't just boarding. They were choosing. The 15th night was when the bridge turned from a marker into a mouth. The first figures stepped out of the train's doors, chains dragging across the steel. Their eyes glowed pale white, fixed on us, unblinking. They moved slow, deliberate, boots striking in rhythm with the humming of the rails. We raised rifles. Every man was trembling. The sergeant barked for us to hold, but his voice carried no weight anymore. None of us trusted command's orders, and none of us trusted silence either. One figure stopped in front of me. He was dressed in combat fatigues, but old. Vietnam era, jungle green shredded and stained. His jaw hung loose like it had been broken once and never healed. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then suddenly his voice was inside my skull. "Join us. It's easier." I staggered back, weapon up. My finger tightened on the trigger, but I couldn't fire. His eyes weren't hostile. They were pleading. Behind him, more poured out. Some were soldiers from wars long before mine. Some wore civilian clothes, torn and burned. They shuffled forward until the bridge swayed under their weight, though the steel never truly touched them. They moved in and out of the rails like the line between worlds was paper thin. The sergeant finally shouted open fire. Gunfire ripped across the night. Rounds tore through phantoms, splitting them into smoke and ash. But for everyone that dissolved, two more crawled from the mist. Their chains rattled louder than our rifles, drowning the shots until we couldn't hear our own weapons. I dropped 2 magazines into the pale forms before realizing it was useless. They didn't fall, not in any way that mattered. They just dissolved and reformed, pressing closer. One reached out, and his fingers brushed my sleeve. Ice shot up my arm like frostbite, setting in instantly. We pulled back toward the tree line, laying down fire that meant nothing. The phantoms pushed us like a tide. Their mouths stayed sewn shut, but the air was filled with screams. Not from them, from us. The corporal tripped near the center span. 3 figures swarmed him instantly, chains snapping around his arms. He fought, kicking, screaming, but the more he struggled, the tighter the chains grew. They dragged him toward the open door of the phantom car. His face twisted in panic as he reached for us. We fired, shouted, tried to cut him loose, but the door slammed shut before we got close. Through the window, we saw him pounding against the glass, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. The train's light flared and he was gone. The bridge shook like it had swallowed something whole. The sergeant screamed for us to fall back. We sprinted off the span, boots hammering, rifles useless in our hands. At the tree line, we regrouped, half our number missing. The mist rolled heavier across the bridge, swallowing the steel until only the faint red glow of the rails showed where it had been. The sergeant's radio crackled. "Hold position. Passage must continue. Do not resist." He smashed the handset against the ground until it cracked. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his voice finally carried conviction. "They want us in there. Every last one of us. That's the passage." We stared at him, not wanting to believe it, but the proof was there in the names under the bridge, in the faces pressed against phantom glass. The train wasn't just carrying the lost, it was collecting. The 16th night was the breaking point. The bridge hummed louder than ever, a sound that rattled teeth and bent bone. The mist boiled off the river, thick and black, stinking of oil and rot. When the train appeared, it didn't stop at the span. It rolled into the valley closer than before, engines screaming without steam or fuel. We saw everything this time. The conductor's cabin empty, the cars stretching endlessly, filled with prisoners who beat against the windows until their hands bled into nothing. The doors opened again, and the phantoms stepped out. Hundreds of them, thousands. They filled the bridge, then the banks, then the tree line itself, surrounding us in a circle of pale eyes and dragging chains. The sergeant gave the order none of us thought we'd hear. "Fix bayonets." It sounded insane, but we did it. Cold steel snapped into place at the ends of rifles. We braced shoulder to shoulder, a half circle against the advancing tide. When the first wave hit, we stabbed. Steel met smoke, but this time some of it stuck. The phantoms shrieked when the bayonets pierced, dissolving slower, leaving behind trails of ash that clung to our gloves. For the first time, they hesitated. We pushed forward, slashing, stabbing, shouting. The chains rattled louder, trying to drown us, but we roared back with curses and screams. For a moment, we believed we might hold. Then the bridge screamed again. The steel bent upward, twisting like it was alive. The rails glowed white-hot. The phantom train roared louder, every window blazing with pale fire. The ground buckled under us. One of the privates fell into the river and vanished instantly, swallowed without a splash. The rest of us fought harder, but the tide surged. Chains wrapped rifles, tore them from hands. Cold fingers closed on throats. I felt one wrap around my leg, pulling me toward the bridge. I drove my bayonet down, breaking the grip, but the fear sank deeper than the frost. The sergeant shouted above the chaos, "Blow the charges!" We'd set claymores and blocks of C4 at both ends of the bridge as a standard procedure. Nobody thought we'd actually use them, but now it was all we had left. We fell back in fragments, covering each other as best we could. Two men sprinted to the detonator, fumbling with wires as the phantoms closed. Chains lashed across the ground. One of them went down, screaming, dragged into the fog. The other slammed the plunger. The night exploded. Fire tore across the bridge, shattering steel, ripping rails free. The blast thundered down the valley, shaking the mountains themselves. Flames rolled into the mist, cutting through phantoms like a scythe. Their screams filled the air, higher and sharper than any human voice. For a heartbeat, the train itself flickered, cars vanishing and reappearing, faces warped, pressed against windows, mouths open in endless howls. Then the whole thing buckled, collapsing into smoke that sucked itself into the river below. When the fire cleared, the bridge was gone. Only twisted beams jutted from the banks, smoldering in the frost. The valley fell silent. We dropped where we stood, too exhausted to move, waiting for the next wave. But none came. The mist thinned. The humming stopped. For the first time in weeks, the valley was just a valley. Morning came gray and hollow. We searched what remained, picking through twisted steel. The names under the bridge were gone, melted into slag. The rails were warped into spirals, smoking faintly. The river ran black, but steady. Half the squad was missing, taken by chains, by the train, by the blast. Their gear lay scattered across the banks, silent reminders of how quickly men could vanish. The sergeant stood staring at the ruins for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. We ended it, but none of us believed that. That afternoon, the radio came alive one final time. Report. The sergeant lifted it slowly, then said 3 words. Bridge destroyed, passage denied. There was silence on the other end. Then a different voice, older, colder. You cannot stop what is not bound. The passage will return. Another place, another bridge. The line went dead. The sergeant dropped the radio in the mud and walked away. We followed because there was nothing left to guard. That night, as we marched back toward Fort Carson, I heard it one last time. A faint whistle in the distance, not behind us. Ahead. We returned to Fort Carson broken and hollow. The march back felt longer than the mission itself. Boots dragged through snow, rifles slung without care, eyes sunk deep into skulls. No songs, no banter, no soldiers' talk to fill the silence. We just kept moving. The base gates opened for us without ceremony. No cheers, no recognition. Just a clerk in a heavy coat scribbling our return into a logbook. We weren't greeted like men who had held ground. We were processed like cargo. Inside, they separated us fast. Each survivor was taken to a different room for debrief. White walls, a table, a tape recorder that clicked when it started rolling. A man in a uniform with no name tag sat across from me. His eyes didn't blink much. He asked for details. Every hour, every sound, every sight. I told him the truth about the hum, the phantom train, the passengers, the names under the bridge. His pen scratched notes I couldn't read. He never looked surprised, never interrupted, just wrote and wrote. When I finished, he leaned forward and asked the only question that mattered to him. Did the passage complete? I hesitated. I thought about the corporal dragged into the car, about the private swallowed by mist, about the explosion that tore the bridge apart. Finally, I said no. The man wrote one last note, closed the folder, and stood. That will be all. You're dismissed. We weren't given leave. We weren't even allowed to go back to barracks. Instead, they moved us into quarantine housing, plain cinder block buildings on the far edge of the base, behind fences and floodlights. No visitors, no calls. Guards outside who never spoke. Medical teams came in, ran tests, drew blood. They scanned our heads, listened to our hearts, asked if we dreamed. When we said yes, they wrote it down. They didn't ask what the dreams were. Maybe they already knew. At night, I heard the others shifting in their bunks. Some muttered prayers. Some cried into their pillows. One screamed so hard they sedated him, and I didn't see him again. I tried to write in my journal, but every time I put pen to paper, the ink blurred. Letters twisted into shapes I couldn't recognize. Once I thought I saw a set of rails etched into the margin, faint but there. After 2 weeks, they released us. Not back to our units, not back to normal duty. Each man was quietly reassigned. Some were discharged with medical notes that read, combat stress reaction. Others disappeared into special units with designations I'd never heard. The sergeant, the only one who had tried to keep us whole, vanished without a trace. One day he was in quarantine. The next day his bunk was stripped clean. No one gave us answers. I was told I would remain in active service but with restricted deployment. They gave me new orders, new training, new missions. None of them made sense. I wasn't allowed near bridges or rail lines again. That much was clear. Months passed. I tried to convince myself it had ended. The bridge was destroyed. The passage denied. We had cut the cycle. But then small things started happening. One night in the barracks, I woke to a faint hum beneath my bunk, like distant steel vibrating. When I pressed my ear to the floor, I heard whistles echoing from nowhere. Another time, I was in town on pass, walking past a railway yard. Every train there was still, engines cold. But as I passed, I saw one car lit from within, faces pressed against the windows, mouths open in silent screams. When I blinked, it was gone. The worst came during a routine training march. We crossed a small footbridge over a frozen creek. As I stepped onto it, I felt a jolt through my boots. The wood vibrated like steel. The air grew colder. For a moment, I swore I heard chains dragging beneath. I nearly froze in place. Only the shout of the lieutenant broke me out of it. I didn't tell anyone. I knew what they would say, that I was cracking, that I needed reassignment, or worse, that I needed to be silenced. The others weren't spared either. One by one, I heard rumors. A corporal had hanged himself in his quarters, leaving only the words "not done yet" scrawled on the wall. Another man was found wandering train tracks in Kansas, uniform torn, eyes glazed, repeating the phrase "tickets please," until police hauled him away. The younger private, the one who vanished barefoot onto the bridge, appeared in my dreams almost every night. Always the same image. Him standing on tracks, holding out a lantern, face hidden by a mask. His voice echoed inside my skull. Next stop. Eventually, command called me in again. Same white room, same nameless officer. He slid a file across the table. Inside were photos of bridges across the country. Some modern, some old wooden trestles, all marked with red X's. Watch stations, he said. If you see activity, you will report. Nothing else. No interference. I asked what kind of activity. He just looked at me for a long time before answering. You'll know. I closed the file without another word. That night, back in my quarters, I sat awake listening to the wind outside. Every gust sounded like a whistle. Every creak in the walls like rails under weight. Sleep wouldn't come. When it did, I dreamed of the valley again, of the bridge twisting upward, of the train's endless cars stretching into forever. I dreamed I was inside one of them. Rows of soldiers sat chained, heads bowed, eyes glowing faint. Their mouths opened in unison, voices scraping against the air. Not done yet. I woke with blood in my ears from grinding my teeth. Weeks later, I returned to the town near Fort Carson. I found a bar where soldiers used to drink, hoping to bury myself in noise and whiskey. The bartender looked at me once and said, "You one of the bridge boys?" The words froze me. He leaned in closer. "Don't answer. Just know this, you ain't the first, and you won't be the last. That train's been running longer than anyone can remember. You burned one track, but tracks run everywhere." I left without finishing the drink. The Army moved me east after that, far from Colorado. They thought distance would dull memory. It didn't. On cold nights when fog rolls in, I still hear it. A low hum, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes faint whistles drift across the dark, slow and mournful. And every time I cross a bridge, no matter how small, I glance down at the beams, searching for names carved deep into the steel. So far, I've found 3. None of them mine. Not yet. But I know one day it will be, because you can't destroy a passage. You can only delay it, and the train always finds another track. Years have passed since that night in Colorado, but time hasn't dulled what we saw. It's sharper now, like a scar that won't fade. Some wounds heal, some don't. This one never will. I can't ride trains anymore. I can't even stand near them. The screech of brakes on steel makes my hands shake. The smell of diesel turns my stomach. Even the rhythm of wheels on tracks feels like a countdown, a drumbeat leading to something I don't want to face again. I told myself for a long time that it ended when we blew the bridge, that we cut the artery, stopped the cycle. But that was a lie soldiers tell themselves to stay sane. The truth is, it was never about one bridge. It was about all of them. About the idea of crossing, of passing from one side to another, and the train always finds a way across. The Army buried the incident like they always do. Official reports said a structural failure caused the bridge collapse. Our casualties were listed as accidents or desertions. Families got folded flags and letters written by men who never saw the inside of a battlefield. I keep a copy of the casualty list. I read the names sometimes, like if I say them out loud, they'll stay alive a little longer. But it doesn't help. I know where they really are. I saw their faces pressed against phantom glass. I saw their hands clawing for release. The worst part isn't that they're gone, it's that they're not. They're trapped in something we can't fight, something we can't bomb or shoot. Every now and then, I meet another man who's been through it. Not many, just enough to know I'm not alone. Their stories are always different in detail, but the same in weight. A platoon guarding a bridge in Europe after the war. A squad stationed by a rail tunnel in Korea. A patrol in the jungles of Vietnam who swore they saw trains passing through trees. Different wars, different places, same passage, same train. None of us were meant to survive, I think. But a few always do. Just enough to carry the story forward. Just enough to warn others who will never believe it. I don't talk about it much. Civilians wouldn't understand. Even soldiers who weren't there just shake their heads and call it nerves or exhaustion. That's fine. Better they laugh than know. But sometimes late at night, I record my memories into an old tape deck. My voice sounds older than it should. Sometimes I stop mid-sentence, convinced I hear a whistle under my words. I play the tapes back, and sure enough, faint in the background, the sound of steel humming. I keep recording anyway. Maybe one day someone will hear it and know I wasn't lying. You might think the scariest part was the phantoms, or the train, or the faces in the windows. But it wasn't. The scariest part was the order. Hold until passage. It means they knew. They've always known. And they'll keep sending men to stand guard, to hold the line, to watch as the lost march past. They'll keep it quiet, keep it buried, because that's what militaries do. They don't protect you from the truth. They protect the truth from you. If you ever find yourself near a bridge in the middle of nowhere and you feel the ground hum under your feet, don't stay. Don't listen for whistles. Don't look for lights in the fog. Turn around and leave. Because once you see the train, it sees you back. And once it sees you, it never lets you go. I'm older now. My hands shake when I write. My hair's gone white. I won't be around much longer. Some nights I dream I'm back on that span, boots planted on steel, rifle in my hands waiting for the whistle. The mist rolls in, the chains rattle, the doors open, and I see the faces of the men we lost, waiting for me, space saved in the cars. I know what that means. One day soon, when the hum rises and the whistle calls, I'll step aboard. Not because I want to, because I was always meant to. That's the truth none of us could change. The bridge was never just steel. The train was never just steel. It's the passage. It always was. And its tracks run everywhere. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.